Hey everyone, it's Ricky Molina from the Ricky Molina YouTube channel. Glad you could be with me today. Today I'd like to tackle a fascinating question that all guitar players face at some point in their careers, and that is, how many guitars do you really need? Now some of you are going to facetiously say, well, how much money you got? And that's certainly true to a large extent because, if you got more money to splurge on these wonderful instruments, you can go nuts and buy guitars in all different styles and shapes and sounds and pickups and acoustics and all sorts of beautiful instruments. But I want to get down to people who are more budget conscious and are also in the development phase of learning how to play the instrument, and perhaps are thinking about getting serious about a particular career in playing the instrument and going down a particular path and a particular style or genre of playing guitar. So I think to answer the question, how many guitars do you really need? I think it's a function of, first of all, your developmental stage. Are you a beginner? Are you intermediate or advanced? Because over time you'll start to play different styles and you'll pick up more guitars along the way, I'm sure. But other than the developmental path, and I'll share with you some of the developmental pointers that I've learned over the years, I think it boils down to two essential questions. Are you a virtuoso type of a guitarist? Do you plan to play on a level or try to get to the level of a very serious virtuoso? Whether you're a virtuoso or whether you plan to be more of a composer, songwriter type of guitarist. Or maybe you're both. But I've noticed, for example, that the virtuoso guitarists tend to key in or focus in on one of their favorite guitars mainly. Like if you think about it, if I say Jimmy Page, you think Gibson Les Paul, Sunburst. If I say Mark Knopfler, you're going to think, Fender Strat or Schecter these days. If you say Larry Carlton, you'll say ES 335. Wes Montgomery, a Gibson archtop. Joe Pass, Epiphone or Gibson. He's played both over the years, and Ibanez as well. George Benson, Ibanez. Pat Metheny, Ibanez. Jazz guitars, that is, archtops. Not to say that Pat Metheny doesn't play a host of other stringed instruments, which he does. He has a beautiful classical guitar that he plays with Brad Meldau, for example, and Charlie Hayden. There's a couple of beautiful albums where he plays, more of the nylon string sound as well. But he tends to have, one or two favorite instruments that he plays a lot. And, that makes a lot of sense for a virtuoso because, they're practicing ways to express themselves through an instrument as beautifully as possible. And to do that, you really have to become totally in tuned or one with an instrument. So the more you play that particular instrument, the more you learn to almost become the instrument. Much like a method actor becomes the character in a movie, a mind and soul kind of joined together, it becomes like one. And in order to get to that level, I believe, practicing constantly on the same instrument over time makes a lot of sense. And I've noticed that in jazz guitar teachers along the way that I've bumped into over the years, and online you can see this too. There are a couple of great jazz guitar teachers. They all have their favorite jazz guitar. But you know what? They tend not to be composers. I've noticed that many of these virtuosos, how many songs did Joe Pass write? How many songs did Wes write? Metheny has written tons of songs, of course. But he's more of an exception. There are, if you look at the keyboard instruments, there are some beautiful virtuosos on the piano that have composed beautiful music over the years. But I'm talking about guitarists today. I find that the virtuosos tend not to be awesome composers, if you will. They're almost too busy mastering songs than trying to come up with new ones. At least that's been my observation. Feel free to disagree with me if you like. So if you plan to take the virtuoso, I'm going to become a master guitarist of any particular style, whether it be classical, whether it be jazz, whether it be fusion, etc., etc., you're probably going to be focusing in on a particular instrument along the way. So you won't have to buy as many guitars. But of course, as you gain experience, as a virtuoso guitarist, you're going to be turning in old guitars along the way that you don't like as much as this new one you heard about, and then you try out that one and you're like, oh, this is even better than the one I had. So you begin to work your way up to your favorite instrument over the years, is what I'm saying, and there's a lot of turnover along the way to getting to your favorite instrument. But eventually you will settle in on finding a particular instrument that you really, really love to express yourself through. So the virtuoso doesn't have to have a million guitars, is my point. Whereas if you're a composer, songwriter, then that's a different story. I believe a pretty good guitarist who likes to think of himself as being more of a composer, and who enjoys the composition process even more than playing a gig live, for example, with the same songs over and over again. I tend to love the creative process. For me, there's nothing like it. You know, when you're writing music, you're going to try to write music in different styles, different genres, whether it be jazz, Latin, bossa, classical, rock, pop, country, crossover, classical, orchestration. And you're not going to only want to play the guitar. You're going to buy, a keyboard controller or some fancy keyboard like a Motif or the Roland instruments these days. And you're going to buy, tons of plugins too for VSTs, for sample libraries and sound libraries for your keyboards. The point is that as a composer, you really need as many sounds you can get your hands on, because you're going to be speaking in different languages and you're going to be orchestrating and arranging so many different parts, and they should have a variety of sounds. It's not so much about expressing yourself through one instrument as the virtuoso does. Instead, you want to be able to play a lot of instruments. But getting back to the guitar side of things, as a songwriter composer, there's definitely something to be said for being able to pick up a nylon string guitar, for example, where you can speak through an instrument in a certain way. For instance, if I'm playing a classical guitar or a flamenco guitar, I'm going to want to emphasize like the gut sound of the instrument and the arpeggiation of chords, rather than playing, like, you don't really strum chords all that much. Occasionally you will, like for an introduction. As an introduction or a closing, but okay, etc., etc. So if you notice, this instrument lends itself very well to arpeggios and picking melodies, chord melody. It has also a nice sort of slow soloing ability. We're not talking about shredding on a classical guitar here. We're talking about vibrato on the strings, emphasizing sustain of passages. So very melodic, very beautiful. So this particular instrument has its own manner of speech, so to speak. Now, when I pick up a steel string, and steel strings are your typical guitar that you start out with. This is an Epiphone Martin knockoff, if you will. This one happens to be made in China. It costs like less than $200, so go figure. And I did an earlier video review of this particular instrument, and I recommend that you check it out. It's a good value for the money. I don't want to say it's as good as a Taylor or some of the upscale Martins by any stretch, but it does the job for what it is. And you can't beat a steel string guitar for strumming a song. I mean, if you want that strum in the background, that high crisp sound of the pick against the strings, nothing like an acoustic steel string. But as you noticed, I played most of these fingerings in the first position, which I tend to favor on a steel string guitar like this. I tend to favor the first position because it's easiest to play. I found that even when I was much younger and my fingers were stronger and more agile than they are today, You'll notice that as you get older and you keep playing over the years that, maintaining your flexibility and agility in your left hand as well as your right hand is a key issue. And there are all sorts of techniques and exercises you can use to keep your fingers in shape as you get older, especially. But even when I was much younger, I noticed that playing an acoustic steel string was very limiting. I did not have any mastery of the upper frets for years, and not really knowing how things were related. And I blame it a lot on the fact that the action on the strings and the steel nature of these strings, some of these strings are so thick that to press down on them up here is a major pain in the butt, and it's physically very trying. It prevents you from speaking in a way that you should learn how to speak. To use the analogy, it sort of forces your mouth in certain positions that you're not really comfortable with. You want that fluidity up here. And as a composer, especially, it is critical that you get away from playing acoustic steel string guitars. Trust me, you'll be thanking me as a composer if you do this. And the way you do it is you start playing jazz guitar. And that's the way I did it, and I highly recommend, buying a jazz guitar and start listening to jazz music and start playing a jazz instrument. I recently did a review of a music for sync course that I took, and I didn't give the course a favorable review at all. And come to think of it, the teacher of the course, who was a guitarist and had a band himself at one point, and he seems to have favored acoustic steel strings for some reason. He once made a comment like, "Oh, you should be able to compose on an acoustic steel string just as well as on an electric guitar or jazz guitar." And I'm like, no, that's not true. When I pick up a jazz guitar like this particular guitar, and I discovered this over the years, and I highly recommend this one, by the way. This is an Epiphone Joe Pass Emperor 2 Pro. You can pick up this guitar at Sam Ash for less than $600. I have another jazz guitar that I play a lot and I love to death, and it's, about $4,000, and it's a great guitar, no doubt. But for the money, this guitar is absolutely an essential guitar in my opinion. First of all, it fits me better. I'm not that big of a person. I don't like big guitars on my lap because they tire out my thighs after a while, and it kind of like the blood stops flowing and everything. So I need a guitar that's fairly light. But this is a beautiful. Look at the wood, and it sounds great, and the fretboard is perfect. It's very playable, easy to play, and just very expressive. And the pickups are wonderful. I think the pickups on this instrument are some of the best pickups I've ever played, and that includes Gibson Les Pauls, all sorts of instruments, Strats over the years, and other Gibson jazz guitars. This pickup system on this Epiphone is specially made and designed. It's got the jazz tone. You can switch it up to treble, intermediary, and then the jazz sound. Beautiful. You've got the volume controls and tone controls. What a beautiful instrument. $600. You can probably find it on sale at Sam Ash for less than $600. What a steal. Okay. And when you play this instrument, I noticed, you want to play it. I play them with 11s. That'd be 11 millimeters strings going to 50s. So 11 to 50s on the string set. I particularly don't like flat wound strings most of the time. I will play flat wounds in certain circumstances. I have a guitar set up to do that, but I prefer the round wound strings, and I'm happy with the sound. The sustain is just gorgeous. If you want to learn expressive jazz chords, then you will need a guitar such as this that's easy to finger, not too much tension or action, and the humbucker sound for the sustain. When you're laying down chord tracks particularly, you need a humbucker pickup. Whereas if you want more of a finger-picking kind of acoustics jazz sound on a jazz guitar, and I have another guitar that has P90 pickups, those are ideal for that sort of, finger-picking arpeggio style. You need that short sort of finger-pick sound, that not too much sustain, just enough, but a nice clear attack. P90s are great for that. But if you want like chords and sustained melodies, you got to have the humbuckers. So once I started playing guitars like this one, my chord knowledge exploded. I started learning all different sorts of chord formations that I never knew, and I started playing arpeggios all the way up and down the fretboards, scales. Everything sort of became so much easier, and the theory started to just come together. It started to gel, and you start learning jazz songs, the classics, the standards, and you just become a much more fluent musician and a composer. And I will confess, with each and every guitar that I just showed you, speak a certain language in a certain way. Your mode of expression will be different from guitar to guitar. As a composer, that's essential, because as soon as I pick up, a jazz guitar, I am thinking in a different language, and I am starting to express myself in certain ways. And I'll take myself to different parts of the fretboard that I normally would not. And I would never go near with an acoustic steel string. So get out of the acoustic steel string world as soon as you can is my recommendation, and start playing, a jazz guitar as a means to gain more expression through the guitar. The last guitar that I'm going to talk about today in my arsenal, and I happen to have about 10 guitars myself, but you don't need that many. I think you can narrow it down to 4 guitars as, a very good, happy medium. So the first would be a very good acoustic guitar. Something, if you're starting out, like I said, something like this, or this particular guitar, which is made by Froggy Bottom. This is a beautiful acoustic steel string guitar, which I got many years ago. And it's kind of like, it's very easy to play. Not quite as easy to play as the jazz guitars I mentioned earlier, but much more easy to play than this Martin D18 knockoff, if you will. And it has a beautiful sound. After all these years, I've never had to make any adjustments on this guitar. This one happens to be made by Froggy Bottom. And it's almost like a steel version of a classical guitar. It's like I want to play songs that I usually play on classical guitar, but in the steel string version. That's what this guitar makes me feel like. One of the nice things about a steel string guitar is that it will ring and sustain much longer than a nylon string guitar or classical guitar. So if you can look to invest in one very, very good steel string guitar, I would recommend doing so. For acoustic guitar, new age type of sound, I would definitely check out the Michael Hedges Aerial Boundaries album. And then also Alex DeGrassi has a beautiful song called Western that I love to play as well. And it's an open tuning song, so be careful with that one. But Alex DeGrassi, what a great steel string guitarist from California. He's got a song called Western. It's beautiful. So he would play it on an instrument such as this. So to narrow it down to 4 main guitars, I would get a very good steel string guitar such as this, number 1. Number 2 would be a very good classical or flamenco guitar. Cutaway is great because you can get up here on the higher frets, and it's got to have a good pickup system so you can plug in into a PA system or into a nice amp. But also keep in mind that there's some amazing nylon guitarists out there like Earl Klugh. Check out everything that Earl Klugh has played. He does everything on a nylon string guitar, and it sounds just absolutely gorgeous. So 1 good steel string guitar, 1 good classical guitar, or flamenco cutaway, such as this one by Cordoba. This happens to be the Cordoba Negra, because it's the black version. I would highly recommend getting a jazz guitar such as this one. This happens to be an Epiphone Joe Pass Emperor 2 Pro. I absolutely love this guitar. I also happen to be favorable to the Eastman guitars. I believe Eastman makes some beautiful instruments, and not only is the wood gorgeous, but the fretboards on all the Eastmans are just perfect. You can fly across an Eastman neck like no other guitar, as far as jazz music is concerned, that is. And lastly, I would recommend getting a guitar such as this one. This one happens to be a Carvin, and they're actually kind of hard to come by these days. They don't make Carvins. They changed the name or something. There's some other manufacturer, but wow, what a neck. I mean, and the reason why you want to buy a guitar like this is to be more of a jazz fusion lead guitarist type of thing and be able to do hammer-ons and pull-offs and, even three-finger type of approach. And I don't have a whammy bar on this guitar, but if you were a serious lead guitarist, who wants to play that sort of fusion jazz sound, lead guitar sound, and even to shred a little bit, this guitar is awesome. It's got humbucker pickups. The neck is solid as anything. I've never seen a neck so solidly made, and yet it's a light guitar, and the fretboard is outstanding. I've even practiced with this guitar for hours just trying to play and learn new chords, and it felt wonderful. And alternatives to this type of guitar would probably be the Ibanez. You've seen all the shredder guitarists out there on YouTube. They typically use this Ibanez type of guitar with the whammy bar here. That's a good one. And of course the Fender Stratocaster or the Les Paul. But you want to have a lead guitar, something that you can play solos with. Now keep in mind that it takes years to acquire these instruments. I don't think you should try to buy them all at once, if budgetary issues are a major concern. I think you want to work your way into these instruments over time, but it doesn't hurt to check them out at the music store and to get a feel for them and see what you're really comfortable with. So here's my word of advice for acquiring new guitars or good used guitars along the way. Go with the ones that you're playing a lot. You go to the store, you try them out, and it's the type of guitar where, it's closing time, and all of a sudden the lights are dimming and you're still playing that instrument. You're like, wow, I really love to have this one. I could play this all evening if time allowed. And that's the guitar you want to. So I recommend acquiring them gradually, not all at once. Get some gigs under your belt or some lessons and teach a few classes and slowly acquire your arsenal or your palette of guitars, so to speak. And I haven't even discussed the whole topic of, picking up a ukulele or a mini nylon guitar, which I happen to have a really nice one from Cordoba. It's a wonderful instrument for adding some texture to a particular piece. That would be a nice acquisition along the way. And then, of course, there are the mandolins and the banjos and the 12-string guitars that are definitely not a priority by any means, but they're nice to acquire and give you some sort of added dimension to your collection of guitars. So to sum up again, I think that if you are a virtuoso, you're probably going to key in and hone in on one particular instrument over the years. Whereas if you're a composer, songwriter type, you're going to want to have multiple instruments to express yourself through and to be inspired by in different ways. It's really amazing, just by virtue of picking up a particular kind of instrument, how it can sort of inspire you to play or try out a new, different approach to a song, which leads to a new composition. I can't tell you how true that is. So if you are a composer and you're a little stuck and you've got writer's block for whatever reason, I'll probably end up doing a whole video on how to overcome writer's block, because there are many strategies that you can use to overcome writer's block. But one of the key remedies for overcoming writer's block as a composer is try out different instruments. Don't limit yourself to one instrument only, like the virtuoso. Different guitars, different instruments altogether, whether it's percussive or keyboards, or synth pads, or horn sections on a keyboard. Try out all things. Even singing out loud is one way to overcome writer's block. but you have to capture everything, and that's the key. Whatever you think is important or could be important or a viable song in any way, shape, or form, you've got to preserve that idea. Even if it's just a kernel of an idea, preserve it, save it, track it, store it in an archive, an organized archive system. What I like to do is take videos of me playing a new song, because in the guitar world of things, if I come up with a new idea, it's very relevant, which position I played it in and which fingerings I used and which strings I'm using. Because, you can play a G up here, a G major 7, but you can play it down here, you can play it up here. It's the same chord, but it sounds different, and the inspiration of the song will change depending on the fingerings and the positions. So I recommend that if you're not necessarily into writing down the notes note by note in tabs or whatever, just videotape yourself playing it at night, in the wee hours of the morning. If you have to wake yourself up just to lay it down, to preserve the idea, then do it. But get it on tape, get it recorded, or preserve it in some way, shape, or form. But that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. It went on a little bit longer than I expected, but I just wanted to share with you some tips on this key question of how many guitars do you really need? If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you would hit the subscribe button and the bell button. That way you'll be notified for any upcoming videos that I have. I've got some music coming up. I've got some more tips and product reviews. Thanks so much, and have a great day.